8 days, 4 games later, the Memphis Grizzlies are finally returning to the friendly confines of the FedEx Forum. We're going to break down the key matchup tonight against the Charlotte Hornets and the upcoming homestand. Coming up right here, right now on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host for today, Damichael Cole, beat writer here in Memphis, Tennessee at the Commercial Appeal. We want to thank you for constantly making Locked On Grizzlies one of your first listens each and every day, and make sure you continue to do so because you know you can find us everywhere. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you like to go listen or watch your podcast. We will be there. Locked On Grizzlies will be there. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users on Prize Picks, remember that you can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. Again, all you have to do is go to prizepicks.com, put in the promo code Locked On to get a 100% instant deposit match of up to $100 for first-time users. Big upcoming homestand for the Grizzlies. You look around the Western Conference, and there's a lot of losing going on right now. We see Golden State struggling. We see, the Lakers are finally starting to win a few games there, but the Clippers have been one of the worst teams in the Western Conference so far. The Timberwolves are still figuring out some things, and this upcoming homestand is another chance for the Grizzlies to really make some hay, particularly in this game against the Charlotte Hornets on today. This is a big game for a lot of reasons. One, the Charlotte Hornets will come into this game kind of undermanned. We'll get to that in a second. But for two, it's my birthday. So happy birthday to me. I'm celebrating my 26th birthday on today, and one of the best places to do it will be at the FedEx Forum. I'll be at the game tonight, keeping you covered. You can check out all of my coverage right there on my Twitter handle at Damichael C. All the Grizzlies coverage, my stories on commercialappeal.com after that. But today's my birthday, so just wanted to get that out the way. And it's a big game for the Grizzlies because they're 11-point favorites tonight against the Charlotte Hornets. And they're playing an undermanned Hornets team. The Hornets tonight will be without Gordon Hayward, who got hurt in their last game. He's declared out. Terry Rozier is doubtful. Caleb Martin is doubtful. And they're going to be without rising star point guard LaMelo Ball, who hasn't played a game yet this season. So you're talking about LaMelo Ball, all-star in his second season last season. Then they'll be missing Terry Rozier, who had been averaging 23.5 points through his first 2 games. Well, he's listed as doubtful, so pretty good chance he doesn't play, but it's still possible. Gordon Hayward, over 17.4 points per game. We know, he gets busy in the mid-range, solid playmaker at the 3 position. They're going to be without him as well. So who are the people? You may say, who do we need to watch for the Charlotte Hornets? Well, there are a couple names. One in particular, Dennis Smith Jr. You may remember him, and you may not. The best local tie-in to Dennis Smith Jr. that I can give you is he's one of the players who played with Team Penny once upon a time, the AAU team, that was founded by Penny Hardaway himself. But since then, he became one of the top players in high school. He went to North Carolina State, had one terrific season there, became one of the top picks in the NBA draft. And his career has been up and down since then. He's played in Dallas, New York, Detroit, Portland. Now he's over in Charlotte, and he's having arguably one of the best seasons of his career. 12 points, 6 assists, 4 rebounds per game. He's shooting 49% from the field, 42% from the three-point line. And let's not forget, Ja gets a lot of those Derrick Rose comparisons, but this was one of those guys who was getting those Derrick Rose comparisons 3-4 seasons ago. So he's explosive, and it's going to be a fun matchup. I love when John Morant gets to go against those other point guards who are pretty dynamic, fast with the ball, athletic leapers and things of that nature. So Charlotte does have Dennis Smith Jr. They also have Kelly Oubre. Kelly Oubre is a guy who, throughout his career, pretty up and down career, but when he's good, he's good. More of a slasher than anything. He's also averaging over 17 points, 5 rebounds. Very athletic guy, but he's shooting 36.8% from three-point range right now. That would be a career high. 42% from the field. So, again, he's going to get his shots up. He only averages 1.4 assists. He's going to get the shots up. Those are two guys that I think, the Grizzlies should be watching today. Then there are a couple other players. P.J. Washington is another one who gets big minutes. Jalen McDaniels has been one of their, in a way, he's been one of their players who's having sort of a breakout season, averaging 10.9 points per game. P.J. Washington over 16 points. But overall, the Grizzlies have a huge talent advantage in this game. Every player who has played in a game this season for the Grizzlies and during the regular season is expected to be active. No John Morant on the injury report, no Jake LaRavia on the injury report, no Desmond Bane on the injury report, no Steven Adams, who, was questionable in the previous game due to jaw soreness. He's not listed on the injury report. The only guys on the injury report are Jaren Jackson Jr., Zaire Williams, and Danny Green. So nothing new, on that front. So the Grizzlies are in a good position. We mentioned they are 11-point favorites in this game against the Charlotte Hornets. The Grizzlies just came off of a win in a game where John Morant shot 7 of 19 from the field, but you had a big performance from Desmond Bane, 20 points in the fourth quarter of that game against the Portland Trailblazers to lead the Grizzlies to that victory. But you're talking about a Charlotte team who, in the absence of some of its best players, have been struggling. They scored 88 points in their last game against the Chicago Bulls. In the previous game before that, they lost to the Kings, 115-108. Again, I can't stress it enough. Golden opportunity for the Grizzlies. The Grizzlies pretty much own most of the categories between these teams. The Grizzlies average 117 points per game. Charlotte averages 113. Where Charlotte does have the edge is Charlotte averages 27 assists a game. The Grizzlies are at 23 assists per game right now. The Grizzlies average 7 steals. Charlotte is a little bit above them at 7.5. Again, Charlotte averages 6.1 blocks. Grizzlies are at 5.6. And they're right tit for tat and rebounding. Charlotte averages 46 boards. Grizzlies at 45.3. So the stats say this game should be more even than expected, but the odds makers over there at BetOnline, 11-point favorites for the Grizzlies, and I think a large part of that is because Charlotte will be without some key contributors in this game. The last thing that I want to point to in this matchup is, again, the defense from the Grizzlies. I think is something we want to see, really have an encouraging performance. We talked about that last game against Portland, held Portland to a season low in field goal percentage, kind of contained Anthony Simons there at the beginning. He got going. He ended up with 31 points. But if the eye test always tells a different story than the stat sheet. The eye test said the Grizzlies held him down long enough to when he eventually got hot, he was only able to get Portland back in the game instead of putting Portland over the top if he had been scoring much more earlier in the game. So that's what the eye test said looking at that game. So the Grizzlies are in a good position. They're favorites in this game. Then you play Washington on the back end. We'll talk about that more later on in the episode. So this is a very critical stretch for the Grizzlies. We talk about the defense, what the defense needs to do. You got some really good individual matchups. Sure, Dennis Smith Jr., who knows? I think Desmond Bane could get that assignment. Maybe Dylan Brooks gets Kelly Oubre. And then, P.J. Washington, Santi Aldama gets that assignment. And, Mason Plumlee going against Steven Adams. Two big guys going at it. We always love to see, those matchups with Steven Adams because most nights he's clearly, moving guys out of the way, stronger than guys. It's always fun to see, those other centers who are top tier level strong battle, against the big Kiwi. But thank you for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies on today. Make sure you continue to tune in to Locked On Grizzlies going forward. And one thing that I want you to know is we love talking about the Grizzlies. Love talking about the Grizzlies. But another thing that I love to talk to you about is Prize Picks. See, the thing about Prize Picks is you don't have to, focus on certain areas of wagering that people like to follow. Prize Picks hit you from a different perspective. You can say, hey, I'm projecting Ja Morant to score 27.5 points. I think Steven Adams can get 8.5 rebounds. I think Steven Adams, who had 5 assists in his last game, by the way, get 2.5 assists. And say, hey, if those guys match those numbers, well, guess what? You will get a good nifty day on Prize Picks. All you have to do on Prize Picks is pick 2 to 5 players, and if they will go over or score more or less than their Prize Picks projections, guess what? You can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. Remember, with Prize Picks, here are the keys. You're not competing against other people. It's just you. It's just the projections. And Prize Picks goes further than just NBA basketball. You do the same thing with touchdowns in the NFL, receiving yards, rushing yards. Same thing with MLB playoffs right now, the World Series. You can bet the hits. You can bet strikeouts on pitchers and things like that. You can say, hey, I think Justin Verlander is going to get 4.5 strikeouts, 5.5. All of that is a part of how you can do projections on Prize Picks. And remember, entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy, and the withdrawals are safe and fast. All you have to do is download the Prize Picks app right now or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users, remember, you get a 100% instant deposit match of up to $100. All you have to do is put in the promo code LOCKED ON, LOCKED on. If you deposit $100, guess what? Get $100 back. You deposit $50, Prize Picks is going to give you $50. All you have to do, go to prizepicks.com or go to the Prize Picks app and put in the promo code LOCKED ON. There are a lot of players on the Grizzlies who, have had some encouraging stretches lately. David Roddy is one. If you go look at our last episode of Locked On Grizzlies, we highlighted David Roddy. We highlighted Desmond Bane's 20-point fourth quarter. Shout out to Desmond Bane right now, leading the NBA in fourth quarter scoring and over 10 points per game. David Roddy's playing better basketball. But one guy we didn't highlight was Jake LaRavia. Jake LaRavia did not play in that last game, and people were wondering because before Jake LaRavia was dealing with his non-COVID illness, he was playing well, right? Thought he was playing pretty good. 9 of 15 from the three-point line, 60% on three-pointers, was top among NBA rookies with at least 15 attempts. So you factor that in. You factor the defensive improvement that's coming day to day, not just with him, with David Roddy and the rest of the young guys, including, Santi Aldama as well. Jake LaRavia has shown some encouraging signs, but he didn't play. And it wasn't just that he didn't play against the Portland Trailblazers. It was the fact that the Grizzlies went with a 9-man rotation. So we've talked a lot about how, it's a preference at this point of the season. Again, the Grizzlies are playing the long game here. It's a preference at this point of the season to use 10 men. This is something that Taylor Jenkins has said in the past, but they went with a 9-man rotation against Portland. I'm expecting them to go back to 10 today against Charlotte, and expecting Jake LaRavia to be a big part of that. Maybe not a big part, but I'm expecting Jake LaRavia to be included in that because he was dealing with a non-COVID illness. We've seen this happen with a couple Grizzlies players so far. We've seen Zaire Williams deal with that. We've seen Ja Morant, and we hadn't talked to Taylor Jenkins since Ja Morant dealt with his non-COVID illness and he returned to play. But if you go back to before that, when Zaire Williams dealt with his non-COVID illness, when he returned to practice, he had on the mask, and the Grizzlies kind of had him off to the side. He was basically working out on his own, and there was kind of a revamping that had to happen that Taylor Jenkins was talking about there. So what's happening now, I think, is Jake LaRavia. They're easing him back in. I don't think there's any concern, say, oh, he's not going to be a part of the rotation long-term and things like that. I think Jake LaRavia will get a shot potentially in this game. And And maybe, I mean, the Grizzlies are 11-point favorites. If they cover and cover and do their jobs, from that perspective, you might get a lot more of Jake LaRavia. But that is something I think is one of the keys to watch in this game. And it's not just Jake LaRavia. We're talking about the offensive side of the ball because we focused on defense so much with this Grizzlies team through the first, 8 games of the season. What about Dillon Brooks? Dillon Brooks is someone we could probably talk about every game because at the end of the day, he's a polarizing guy from that perspective. He has great games. John Morant's out. He kind of has, a 30-point performance. And then you go to his most recent performance against Portland and you say, what's going on? But some people will say, hey, it's just part of the Dillon Brooks experience. This is what you get. But against Portland, Dillon Brooks, 9 points. Who cares? Because he shot 3 of 7 from the field. And remember, that's what you want, right, Grizzlies fans? A lot of Grizzlies fans that have said things to me, they say, hey, we want Dillon Brooks shooting the basketball less and more efficiently. He only scored 9 points. So who cares? Because he shot 3 of 7 from the field, 1 of 2 on three-pointers, 2 of 2 from the free throw line. And he had 7 field goal attempts in 30 minutes. And that was the least amount in the entire starting lineups. But here's where the problem comes in for me. 7 field goal attempts, great. 0 assists, not so great. This is a guy who told me before the season, Dillon Brooks told me that he wants to average 4 to 5 assists per game. Lofty number. That's Desmond Bane's numbers right now. That's where Desmond Bane is. Desmond Bane also had 5 assists against Portland. But in this game, Dillon Brooks, 0 assists. So what we're seeing as big reasons for that, I think, is when he's in the game with Desmond Bane, when he's in the game with John Morant, he's playing more off the ball, only in a spot-up role, sort of in a way, whereas Desmond Bane and John Morant are kind of dominating the ball more, and that's the way it should be. So even when the bench comes in, there was a time where I thought, hey, the Grizzlies should play Dillon Brooks more with the second unit so he can get more shots up and he can be more of that playmaker that Taylor Jenkins actually is, asking him and wanting him to be. But we see Desmond Bane kind of has taken that role and ran with it. So Desmond Bane is your guy that's running with the second unit a lot and kind of is pretty much the reason why they're able to go to these 9-man rotations because they just throw Desmond Bane in the other 4 guys and just go. So Dillon Brooks, you want to see more of an all-around offensive performance from him. 9 points on 3 of 7 shooting. Again, that's no problem. But 2 rebounds, 0 assists. You need something else. And granted, I did mention he had an excellent defensive game for the most part against Portland. And I am, a big advocate. That's something that you guys hear me talk about a lot is the energy aspect of a game. Guys get tired. I see guys after the game huffing, puffing, hands on knees. I see guys check out during the game when we're sitting courtside there from time to time. So those things happen, and you notice them, and you notice the lead up to it as well. Players will have a couple bad possessions, or they'll have a cheap foul right before they're ready to check out of the game when they're a little tired and things like that. So those are kind of the intricacies inside the game that you try to focus on to say what leads to this type of stretch, what leads to that type of stretch. But Dillon Brooks, again, I've talked a lot about the good with him is he's taking the pressure off of Desmond Bane. That's something else to watch. Who guards the primary ball handler today? It's going to be Dennis Smith. Do you get that matchup to Desmond Bane? Or do you put Desmond Bane on a guy like Kelly Oubre, who's going to get his shots up? So you're going to work regardless. It's going to be a lot of work to go around regardless of who gets that matchup. But Dillon Brooks, you want to see more. You want to see at least 4 boards. You want to see at least 3 assists, I think is a solid number for him. And you just want to see a more impactful Dillon Brooks from the offensive side of the basketball. I think that is something he can improve on. I think that is something that he will, improve on at the end of the day. Thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. Make sure you go for your second listen. You go check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter to the biggest stories in sports. Locked On Sports Today has you covered with each and everything. I'm talking about beyond the scoreboard. Go behind the scenes with the local experts where you get the insight that only Locked On can provide. Again, that's Locked On Sports Today, available right here on YouTube, available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you listen, wherever you watch. Locked On Sports Today is there. The Grizzlies will enter this game against the Charlotte Hornets, 5-3, middle of the pack, Western Conference. But when they get to the back end of this homestand, going into that game Monday against the Boston Celtics, which we will preview on our next episode of Locked On Grizzlies, Elfman had played 2 home games. Charlotte, Washington Wizards. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this Washington Wizards matchup because, quite frankly, I think this game is an intriguing one, to say the least. It's an intriguing one for all the reasons that I said the Hornets game is intriguing, from the perspective of you got a ball handler in Monte Morris who doesn't turn the ball over. We talk about Tyus Jones in the assist-to-turnover ratio. Monte Morris is always one of the other guys who is near the top in that category as well. And then you have Bradley Beal, who, is a great scorer. And remember, there were some people once upon a time that wanted the Grizzlies to trade for Bradley Beal. I don't think anyone is saying that now, watching Desmond Bain. I don't think people are advocating for such a thing. But there was a time where people in Memphis were very fascinated with the idea of Bradley Beal. But the matchup that I want to watch the most is Kristaps Porzingis. The thing about the guy, another one of those players who's called a unicorn, Kristaps Porzingis. Porzingis is 7-footer, agile, can shoot the three-pointer, can drive the basketball. You've heard that before. We've talked about a player like that before. To take it a step further, we talked about a player that cooked the Grizzlies about a few days ago, and that's Lauri Markkanen, who had a similar skill set. And I think his skill set was a reason why he was a big problem for the Grizzlies. They didn't want to go out there to guard him at the three-point line. When they went out there, he was so quick getting to the rim. We saw him, do the reverse dunk. He was a mismatch when the Grizzlies went to their switching scheme, and he kind of, abused the Grizzlies in those situations. Just all around was a tough player to guard. Well, guess what? Kristaps Porzingis is another player of that same mold. It will be interesting to see how the Grizzlies match up against him in that game. I think Washington Wizards right now, 4-4 record as of this day. Before that game against the Grizzlies, they will take on the Brooklyn Nets on today as well. And then they'll travel over to Memphis for that contest. But a lot of similarities too in that game in terms of the teams are pretty similar in assists per game, steals, blocks. They're very close statistically wise. The Grizzlies have a rebounding advantage, averaging over 45 boards. Washington is at 43 boards, and they have a big scoring advantage. Washington, and I say only in today modern NBA terms, Washington only averages 110.8 points per game. As comparison, the Grizzlies are averaging 117 points per game. So Washington's average is 23rd in the NBA, while the Grizzlies are 5th. But the Wizards do have a better point differential than the Grizzlies. Again, the Grizzlies' losses have been kind of lopsided, and that's kind of affected, their point differential this season. You got the 16-point loss to Utah. You got the massacre against the Dallas Mavericks, as that was I think 41-point loss against the Mavericks. So those two contests are heavily factoring into the Grizzlies' point differential right now. So a lot of big things to watch in this upcoming stretch for the Grizzlies. This game against the Hornets, very winnable game. Game against the Wizards, the Grizzlies will be favored again, more than likely. It's another day to watch Memphis at the FedEx Forum. And just to say, shout out to the fan base. Just when I went to the first couple games at the FedEx Forum, it is extremely noticeable how you guys are showing up. This is coming from someone who grew up in Memphis, was a kid in Memphis. I've seen the FedEx Forum growing up. The grit and grind days, they were packed out for the playoffs. But just seeing, the day-to-day approach to Grizzlies games, all of the levels, the terrace level, plaza, courtside, sold out, season tickets before the season start. Gossett Garage sold out. Grizzlies fans, you are showing up and showing out so far this season. Can't wait to get back in FedEx Forum to witness that atmosphere because it's unique. And now you have people wanting to come out every night. It's the Ja Morant effect. It's the Desmond Bain effect. It's the Grizzlies effect. I always go back to that game against the San Antonio Spurs last season. I remember I had a couple people who reached out and said, I was going to go to today's game when they played the Spurs. I said, oh, it's just the Spurs. I'm not going to that game. It's just the Spurs. Next thing you know, they're calling me after the game. Oh, my goodness, I can't believe I didn't go. You know why? Ja Morant scores 52 points, has a dunk over Jakob Poeltl, and then, you know, he has Steven Adams' full court pass. It was one of the most exciting games of the season. So I'm saying all that to say, yes, it's the Hornets on paper. No LaMelo Ball, no Terry Rozier. And then, oh, yeah, you're going to play the Wizards. Yeah, they have Bradley Beal, but Kristaps Porzingis, don't move the needle as much. But you never know what you're going to expect when you watch the Memphis Grizzlies. So make sure you stay tuned in for that as well. On the next episode of Locked On Grizzlies, we will recap those two games as well as previewing the big game against the Boston Celtics on the second night of that back-to-back on Monday. Thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen. For your next listen, make sure you check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast because it's the biggest stories of the day. Plus, you get the instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. Again, that's Locked On Sports Today. Thank you for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies today as well. I'll be back with my co-host Joe Mullinax next week when we start to get into next week's coverage. And guess what? Make sure you're tuned in next week because we have a lot of big things that we will hit on while the Grizzlies are here. I will be having you coverage on the grounds. That means Jaren Jackson Jr. updates. That means a Zaire Williams update and much more. We will have all of that coming up. So thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies. We appreciate you and make sure you continue to stay in. I'm your host, Damichael Cole. We'll see you next time on Locked On Grizzlies.